I am Claire Mitchell, Doctor of Laws and King's Counsel.
And I am Zoe Venditozzi, Doctor of Laws, teacher and writer.
On the 8th of March 2020, International Women's Day, we launched the Feminist Witches of Scotland campaign. The Witchcraft Act, in force between 1563 and 1736, saw thousands of people, mostly women, accused and executed as witches in Scotland, in the country's biggest and most brutal miscarriage of justice. Our campaign had three aims: to get a formal state apology for those accused of witchcraft, to obtain a pardon for all those convicted,
On International Women's Day 2022, the first of our aims was realised when First Minister Nicola Sturgeon issued a formal state apology to those accused as witches. The first formal state apology ever. We are currently working with politicians to ensure there is legislation passed to pardon those accused as witches, to change their status from convicted witches to those who ought never to have been prosecuted. We continue our work to obtain a national monument so those who suffered will never be forgotten. Join us as we speak to the experts on the witchcraft trials, both here in Scotland and further abroad, as we explore the history of women in Scotland and continue the cultural conversation of what it means. Witches of Scotland podcast. This is, again, quite remarkably, episode 86.
Well, don't say it like that, Zoe.
What do you mean? Like, I'm exhausted, and how is this my life, and what happened? Where have the years gone, and who are we? Like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly that. Ennui is being.
I'm not complaining. I'm delighted. No. All killer, no filler. Well, sometimes a bit of filler on our part, but not on our guest part, and certainly not today. See what I did there? Very slick. We've got two guests today. We'll tell you about them anon. But first of all, Claire, what's been happening in the news? Okay, what's happening in the news, Claire?
Well, a lot of things are happening in the news. Did you hear about this ex-BNP Christian patriot? Of course, I've got that in inverted commas. Anytime we see the word Christian from now on, it's got to be in inverted commas. Unless specifically we tell you it's not an inverted commas one.
I do indeed know about this Christian patriot.
Tell us more.
So for listeners and viewers outside of the UK, there was, I don't know if it still exists actually, a party, a political party, again, heavily, bunny-eared, called the British National Party.
Hang on, did you just say heavily bunny-eared?
I'm meaning when I say political party, I'm putting in quotation marks because there were basically, I think they're disbanded. I think it became UKIP maybe, or some of them did. I'm not sure. It's hard to track what the race is. It doesn't always make sense. But the BNP, the British National Party, was hell-bent on keeping Britain white and keeping Britain for the British, and just a lot of shite, actually, as we'd say in Scotland. But there is an organisation called the Knights Templar International, and there's this guy called Jim Dowson who appears to be the front man, and he's got a long history of involvement. This is according to The Ferret, which is an investigative journalistic website into things that happen in Scotland. They're very good. We've actually done a podcast with them quite a while ago, but they have been looking into this. So we've said in various episodes up to now that there's money flowing into the country about things like abortion rights and stuff about immigration. And it would seem that this is one of the ways in which it's coming in. So according to the Ferret's research, there is this guy called Jim Dowson who is now supporting Scotland's, what they describe as Scotland's new wave of night patrols. And this is from an article written by Karen Goodwin. So thank you, Karen. But I'm just going to give you the edited highlights, which is that there's this right-wing nationalist Christian group that's raising money across the UK and Europe and in America.
Can I guess? Is it to give it to women's shelters, and is it to give it to women's aid, and is it to give it to women's groups that help women fleeing domestic violence?
Is it feck, Claire? It is in fact to buy equipment for Scottish night patrols who have been accused of targeting migrants. Now, the guy, Jim Dowson, was co-founder of Britain First. He's from Airdrie, which is in Scotland, but he now lives in Northern Ireland, apparently, and he fronts something called the Knights Templar International, KTI, which is described as a militant Christian nationalist organisation.
Militant nationalist? What's going on?
Yeah, I know. I just feel like, what would Jesus do? I don't think Jesus would turn up in a fucking balaclava in the middle of the night and stand outside like hotels and try and look scary.
I mean, it's a long time since I did my Catholic catechism, but I remember none of that.
It's just repulsive. And I don't want to go on too far about this, but it's got something to do with those people who are called Unite the Clowns, who were involved in what they called Scotland's largest anti-migrant rally, where they were very firmly outnumbered by anti-racists. But anyway, they're supposedly putting money into things like stab vests, cameras, and high-vis security jackets. Now,
hang on.
Yes.
Are they protecting themselves? Is this...
Well, I think the narrative, Claire, is that they're there to protect us women and girls from this migrant danger, and that they have to wear the stab vest because things are so dangerous for them. I would suggest that they themselves are the caller coming from the house. So these are the people where there's a very high percentage, higher than the national average, I believe, of people that have been accused of domestic violence. And we talked about this before. We've done content about this on Instagram and TikTok and so on. But a lot of these guys are like protecting our women and girls. Then there's women that come forward and say, well, actually, I used to go out with him and he beat me black and blue. Or I used to go out with him and I've got a restraining order against him. Or he spent time in jail for domestic violence.
What do you think the psychology is, Zoe, behind that? Like, what do you think someone's sitting in their house? I mean, they must know they have all these convictions, right?
I speak freely.
Speak freely, you're amongst friends.
I think that the psychological motivation for this is an intoxicating blend of sexual insecurity, tiny penis, willful ignorance, and having a desperate lack of meaning in your life. And instead of doing something to actually help people, it's easier to turn up with a balaclava on or a stab vest when there's no real danger to your life apart from your brethren, and pretend that you're a big I am that's got a big idea. And actually what these guys should be doing is fucking working in a soup kitchen, or, you know, helping to clean up in places that have been vandalized, or, you know, helping to, like, you know, support kids after school, like sporting activities, something useful. But instead of that, they're pretending that they care about women, and they don't care about women.
No.
They care about having access to women before anybody else having access to women. And they think that they own, quote unquote, British women. That's what I think it is. And I think that they are just desperately insecure, and really what they need is serious therapy and something meaningful to do in their lives instead of this faux war, faux outrage, massive rampant racism.
But I agree, right? Also, what I think is really funny is that it's tied up with this knights idea. Like, it's tied up with the idea that they're some kind of like crusaders.
Yeah, no, it totally is. That whole thing about the Knights Templar, I mean, they're not. And really, it's also obviously a massive Islamophobia. Like, it's a massive thing about this language around the idea that we're being, quote unquote, invaded, and that we're going to be, quote unquote, decimated by these Muslim marauders that are coming to the country. It's like, it's just bullshit. We've had a decent sized Muslim community in Scotland for a really long time. And people are integrated. Like, you know, like when I first moved to Glasgow, I was really taken aback when there was a shop next to me that it was a Pakistani family that ran the shop. And I started speaking to the guy who worked behind the counter, and he had the broadest Glaswegian accent I'd ever heard in my life. And I was like, these are Scots. They're Scottish people. It's just, it just beggars belief. But I think because of this sort of the crap that we see from people like Nigel Farage and from Donald Trump, it's emboldened a lot of pathetic people that were already racist to feel like that they've got a cause, and that they're, as you're saying, that they're knights and that they're defending women. They're not. We don't need defended by you. We need defended from you. And actually we can look after ourselves for the most part.
Well, I think we should just bring the podcast to an end at that point, everyone.
I'm sorry, that's my feelings.
No,
I just think that these people are repulsive, and I don't want any of these horrible men speaking for me or acting like they care about me. They're the same people that are generating this idea about, like, photographing and filming people just going about their own business in play parks and then putting it on Facebook that, oh, there's a suspicious man and he's going to steal your children.
Meanwhile, as you say, striding about fully wearing a balaclava. It's
like,
why, if you're protecting us all, why are you the one wearing the balaclava?
And we all know the stats completely support the fact that you are much more likely to very, very unfortunately and sadly and awfully be attacked or hurt or sexually assaulted by somebody you're having a relationship with, by somebody you're related to, by somebody you're related to is brought into the family, or by a person in, a position of authority like a priest or a teacher or a scout leader. We know that, right? It's not stranger danger that we should be worried about. It's the people that we choose to associate with or that we have to associate with through family. And I just think it just does us such a massive disservice, because it means we're taking our eyes off real danger and wasting a lot of time in just dealing with racist twats.
I have started calling people that refer to the manosphere, I'm calling them manophere, because they are men of fear. They just fear, and that's why they lash out and blame everyone else for their problems.
And it's just really interesting that they've now very recently latched on to this idea about being Christians, and it's funny that when a man is accused of being, like, say, a rapist, then he suddenly gets super religious. We've seen it happen so many times recently.
It's a playbook.
It's outrageous. It's totally outrageous. It's not helped by the fact that we've got alongside that people making a lot of money from that kind of lifestyle, those decisions. And then you've got the women that are then alongside those men that are making money from grifting and pretending that they're at home milking a cow and making, jam from scratch. And they've got all these beautiful children who are all blonde, by the way, and that they're just doing this wonderful, wonderful job. Like, that's not help, because they're just making money off it, because there's a lot of really kind of, susceptible people that want to escape from for how difficult modern life can actually be, and have an idea, if they roll back to that, to being a trad wife, that their life can be much nicer, much more wholesome.
Hang on, did you just seamlessly move on to the next item in the news? It's so good, ladies and gentlemen, she's so good.
So who are we going to talk about now that's been in the news?
Next person we're going to talk about is Nara Smith. Nara Smith is the person who is the influencer who speaks in a beautifully soft voice and wears like really couture items, and she's absolutely stunning. And she speaks very quietly and softly, and the whole shtick is that she makes things from scratch that you can just open a packet and buy. Like, my kids wanted Ritz crackers, so I went out and I plucked some corn or whatever and takes it from start to finish. Now, there's two schools of thought. One is that she's now saying, I don't know what a trad wife was. I had no idea about that. I was just doing these videos and they were enjoyable and they're getting lots of clicks. I don't really understand why people are calling me a trad wife. And like, to a degree, I get that, because what she was doing clearly wasn't an actual representation of trad wifeism. Nobody thought that she was getting up in the morning, putting on a Chanel couture ball gown and then going downstairs and spending 6 hours making her children, I don't know, Haribos.
I disagree, Claire. I think some people did take what she was doing as being quite genuine, but amplified. And they saw that, she was doing that for the cameras, but that out with that, she was being basically what we're calling a trad wife. Now, I just need to do a little sidebar here, or a footnote, however you want to construct it. When we're talking about a trad wife, we're not just talking about a situation where two people get married and one of them, usually the mother, if this isn't a heterosexual relationship, chooses to be a stay-at-home mum. That's not the same necessarily as a trad wife. I was a stay-at-home mum. So I stayed at home to look after my kids. I mean, I certainly didn't make Ritz crackers from scratch, and I obviously didn't have any couture, and I didn't look like that.
You were a rubbish mum then, obviously.
It's a shit mum. And my kids will hate me. It's not a shit mum. But I was a stay-at-home mum, and I made a very conscious decision because I felt like I wanted to be at home with my kids, and we made it work in that way, and I worked part-time as they got older and blah, blah, blah. But that's not the same as a trad wife. So a trad wife situation is where it's the man and the woman and they get together and they love each other very much.
Very much.
And the whole idea is that the trad wife, as we say in Scotland, shuts her puss, which means that she doesn't speak and that the husband makes all the decisions, right? So this isn't a 50-50 situation where you're thinking about, I'm going to be at home for, say, 10 years or whatever, and this is what I'm going to do to maybe get back into work or whatever it is. This isn't the world of prenups. We don't really have them in Britain anyway, particularly, but it's not a world of thinking ahead in that way. The trad wife movement is very much, very deliberately, the female is submissive to the male, that often there's a religious background with it,
Subservient,
and then it's about control, and it's about the women performing female activities, and that's a very different thing to somebody choosing to have a stay-at-home type situation. They're not the same thing at all. And I think people sometimes get a wee bit confused, because we have a part in our book about the modern stuff and about witch trials, and saying that trad wives really concerns us. And we've had a couple of reviews on Goodreads where people don't understand. I don't know if they've not read it properly, or they just can't conceive that there's different ways of doing things.
It's certainly not women deciding to stay at home and look after their kids a more important job. How can you possibly think of?
Yeah.
We live in a capitalist society where the actual most important job of the world isn't actually described as work. You know, up till now, women have been saying, "Oh, I don't work at the moment. I'm looking after my kids." What?
Yeah. It's such a crap job sometimes. I mean, it can be good, but it's just a grind, right? A lot of the time. And that's just the nature of keeping people alive and relatively clean and relatively well fed.
But that's because you didn't make Haribos from scratch. That's why it was a grind. If you had made Haribos from scratch, or Ritz crackers, or
I'm just thinking about what it would have been like. Thank God for my children that there wasn't the making content that there is now 23 years ago when I had my first child. Because could you imagine?
Hi guys, here I am, and my mum's just refused to make us Haribos.
Hi guys, here's my mum having a total meltdown. Hi guys, my mum's just called me a wee shit.
There's that. I mean, I know you should not shout at children, but
No.
but the woman who careers into her kids' bedroom where they're both on the internet and shouts at them because there's an unflushed shit in the toilet.
Oh, I hate that so much.
It's one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
Oh, I hated that as a mother. I think she was really horrible to her children. I didn't like that at all. I wouldn't have actually done that.
She was.
Like that. But it's just, I just think the whole idea that these women that are presenting themselves as trad wives making content, who are making money out of it, the idea that they are fully present and intentional mums whilst putting that much effort into making content and editing content, and how much they make themselves look beautiful, it's just bullshit.
No,
they've got
totally.
These are jobs. They're jobs they're doing. Their children are actors in an ongoing film of their life.
I totally agree, but what I would say is that I don't think Nara Smith is the best example of it. I think the better example of it is that woman who goes around in a very, very short skirt. I cannot remember her name. She's very, very fit, and she says people should only wear what their husbands want them to wear. Have you seen her?
No, thankfully. I actually don't get a lot of that content coming across my page, thank God.
Well, because unfortunately my algorithm...
I don't know why you're getting that. That seems weird.
I don't. It's maybe because I'm the one that posts more on social media.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, no, I don't, and I don't want to look at it. And I think maybe because I know full well what it's like to have children. I mean, I've got 3 kids, and there's like 5 years between the oldest and the youngest, and it's not glamorous. It's really great fun at times, and I really enjoy being a mum. I really enjoy it. I really love my kids. I think they're really hilarious a lot of the time, but not all the time. And I just can't even imagine. I can't imagine, like, when your kids are wee, like going, oh, I just need to make myself look gorgeous. I'm just going to sit on my ring light. Okay, guys, if you could just sit there with your wooden toys and just wholesomely, like, what a load of shit. My kids would probably be strapping all the time.
Didn't they also find out that all those wooden toys that people were allowing their children to gnaw on contained high amounts of lead?
God, I don't know. I mean, I was insane when we had our oldest one, Luca, who's now 23. We wouldn't let him watch Power Rangers because we were like, it's too violent.
What?
I know.
Yeah. And was it was it by the time baby number 3 came along that it was just an all-out, anyone can do anything they want? And
Well, I mean, I believe you know my youngest son.
I have met him, yes.
I mean, you could not get a thuggier thug than Rocco. So I think by the time he came along, it was kind of like, okay, guys, I'm now just keeping you alive. That's
We've gone back to the drawing board. You can
Yeah.
watch whatever you want, just keep breathing.
yeah. Just don't come and annoy me. I'm drinking gin. That's just a joke. That is just
Jokes.
absolutely a joke. I only
It's-
took up drinking quite recently,
Relatively.
coincidentally when I met Claire. Anyway, no, I did drink. Don't be ridiculous. I just didn't drink very much when they were little. I couldn't have coped to the hangover. It would have been terrible. Anyway,
oh my God.
back to serious stuff here.
Yes.
First of all, Claire, I'd like you to clarify, if you don't mind, it's a legal question. What is an attorney general?
Okay, well, the current Attorney General in the US is a man called Todd Blanche. Now, the thing about Todd Blanche was, I think he was Trump's own lawyer. Was that?
Oh God,
Was
I
that?
don't know.
Have you heard of that?
No.
So I had heard that Todd Blanche, who it is him, was Trump's own advisor. But basically, the United States Attorney General is the person who advises the Department of Justice and serves as their chief law enforcement officer. So he is principal legal advisor to Donald Trump, and he also gives legal advice to people in the cabinet of the USA. So the equivalent in Scotland would be the Lord Advocate. That name is still Lord Advocate, even though many women have held the role. And currently, yeah, as I said, that man is a gentleman by the name of Todd Blanche.
I think gentleman's stretching it. I believe that Todd Blanche has recently gone on record to say that their aim, that their plan, the Trump administration, is to make abortion illegal across the United States, and that they're going to, quote, protect the unborn from the moment of conception. I mean, I would say some things to that. The first thing I would say is, this is quite an extreme one, but I think that maybe we should be thinking as women more about withholding sex, and then maybe more men would actually get involved and say, do you know what, women need to have access to healthcare. Like, that's the beginning and the end of it.
Was there not really a few years back and still continuing a group of women who'd have said, is it 4K or something like that, who've said we're not having sex with men anymore until we get better rights?
Is it in Korea?
I think.
We need to look that one up, yeah, because that's ringing a bell with me, where they've done that quite successfully, and have, you know, I mean, I think that's one way, but then, I mean, the way things are going at the moment, I mean, I don't even want to say what I think will end up happening with that, to be honest. But I would say two kind of practical steps that people should take. One is, I would be absolutely stocking up on contraceptives. I'd be getting as much as I could possibly stockpile, which is ridiculous. And the second thing is that I'd be making pen pals abroad. So if you needed to just do a little trip somewhere, then you could do a little trip and you'd have friends to stay with. That's what I'd be doing.
Can I get to it's 4B, the feminist movement in Korea. South Korea. And it's 4Bs because the words for no marriage, no childbirth, no dating, and no sex with men all begin with letter B. So it's 4Bs. And that was its idea.
And the thing is, I think that with the so-called male loneliness epidemic, a lot of women are sort of, you know, unintentionally doing 4B across Britain and America and Europe that, you know, we hear of. More and more women are kind of going, do you know what, if it's a life with cats, I'm okay with that.
It's not a loneliness epidemic, is it? It's just the natural consequences of people behaving like arseholes.
I think it's often referred to as fuck around and find out. But you don't get to fuck around.
I was going to say it ironically.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway,
Well,
it's a bit rude. Shall we move on to our the person that we're going to be thinking about for today, the person we're
well, wait a
memorializing?
minute. Before we do that,
Oh,
Zoe, she said
what?
incredibly professionally, there's
Yeah.
one big important bit of news that we have.
I thought we were going to do that at the end.
Oh,
We'll do it now. Do it now.
okay. Um, So, we just want to let you know that we have officially drafted the petition and sent it in to the Lord Lion. I'll talk about the Lord Lion a wee bit later, but that's the oldest heraldic court in the country. That wasn't easy for me to say. And it is in charge of coats of arms. So Zoe and I, of Witches in Scotland, which is in Scotland,
Hey,
which
what's
is,
going on? Are you having a stroke?
I hope not.
Need a sip of water.
I think I do actually. I'm a bit dehydrated.
Mm.
Which is of Scotland. And we are waiting to hear back from them. So we'll keep you updated as to how our coat of arms progress is
I had
going.
to laugh. On the socials this week, it was on Facebook. You had put up something about us, being a clan. One of us had made a little video and it was up, and a man, all men,
Hashtag always a man.
yeah, popped on to say to us, if you don't do it this way, then you're in danger of breaking the law. And I said, I don't know if you're familiar with our campaign, but I think we're okay with the legal side of things. I mean, I don't feel secure necessarily about everything that we do, but I feel fairly secure at this point in Claire's career. She's got a fairly good grasp on Scottish
I mean,
law.
there's probably a
You
lot
know.
of solicitors listening to this shaking their head.
And he really wasn't for kind of like a gentle nudge
No,
to pipe down, and just kept going, and it was
no.
kind of amazing.
I think, did you not say at one point, I can't remember, it was you and I say, have you heard of Witches of Scotland? And he said, no, why should I? It's like, right, okay,
You're on
you're
our
on our
page.
page and you're telling us
Just
about
bizarre.
about coats of arms. But he's absolutely right, and it is a great thing. So a coat of arms was literally, in ye olden days, people when they went to war would wear obviously a coat of their arms would be of metal. It would literally be not able to identify who they were. So they literally wore cloaks with the picture on them that would allow people to say that they're from that clan, they're from this clan, or they're from this group or that group. And that's how it grew up, that you're a coat of arms. The court left and the arms stayed. So individuals, companies, clans can ask for a coat of arms, and that is what we are.
Okay. And it's very exciting and very official. So, but it might take some time. So just
It
bear
will.
with us.
It
We've
will.
also been asked about the coat of arms and how it's designed, and we'll maybe talk about that at a later point in the future.
Yes.
But we have had a couple of people that have very kindly come to us and said, "Can I help design them?" But there is an official designer, isn't there, Claire?
There is, and there's a number of official designers, and you will
Well, I
be.
had it in my head that it was just one person.
There's one senior person. It's a woman,
Okay.
and there are other artists that maybe work for her
You see,
or,
in my
or
mind,
in the system. Yeah,
she was in like a tower, like not imprisoned, but she worked in a tower, and she had all these fancy quills and
that
paints.
that's exactly what it is. Exactly.
I'm glad that it's exactly as I imagined.
But the thing is, these are so, I mean, heraldic stuff is so detailed, and each part of it means something, and they have to be made exactly like it's supposed to and stuff, that we can sort of agree what that will look like, but the actual end product could be really quite a long time. So we're going to have to be as patient as we possibly can about that.
And we get to use our own motto, don't we?
We do get to use our own motto. Now, we have been having discussions about that, and I think that we should not say any more about what that is until the discussions end.
Who are you having a discussion with?
Me and the other people.
What other people? You
Only
see,
Joe.
guys, you're here when the cracks start to show. It could be that Claire's speaking to herself, of course. Who knows? Okay, so that's all very exciting, and people just need to kind of just wait. As we've got any information, we will let you know what the information is, but it could take a wee while.
Yes.
But we're doing it. Don't worry, male commentator. We are doing it correctly, as the law dictates. Would you now like to talk about who we are?
Andrew Tate? Oh no. Would you like to talk about Andrew Tate? No. Should we just skip over it?
No, let's talk about Andrew Tate. And also, could you say his name properly, please? Is Andrew Tights. I know you don't like that because it's slightly sexist, but I do think it's funny because of what he was wearing when he was picked up.
He was wearing...
If he liked, at the very least, he liked a pop sock.
He looked as if he was maybe going to be doing a ballet class in an hour.
He's such a douchebag, honestly. But his lawyer is an American, and he has recently got a record to describe the Tate brothers as freedom fighters.
Well, can I just pause there?
Yeah.
They are fighting for their freedom.
I don't think that's what freedom fighters means
not.
exactly.
It's not.
And he will not let them get sent back to Britain to be executed.
What?
Just a little point of fact. We don't do executions in Scotland or in England or in the UK, and haven't done since, and this is an official term, 19 oatcake. We don't do them here. We don't do the death penalty. So he's not getting sent back here to be executed.
Maybe he's just wanting to, say, oh, I'm not sending them back to be executed, and then when they get here not being executed, he's like, what a good guy I am. They're not being executed.
Interesting. So he's building in a win. It wouldn't actually surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me. And Claire, that also reminds me of something else, actually, that I'd put down to talk about, but I'd forgotten to say because I've somehow skipped ahead, which is that we filled out a petition for the Scottish Government about, well, what's it about, Claire?
We did. It's about the protection of women and girls. Strangely enough, it's not about that.
Oh, is it something sensible about the law?
It is. It is something sensible about the law.
Responsibility.
A few things that are sensible about the law. It's about things that can be put in place to protect women and children themselves and going through the legal process, and also to create new offences which involve like AI and things like that. So basically what they've done is they've got the consultation and they've asked people lots of questions. Now the consultation I think goes on till the end of August. Anybody who's listening to this, just go on and Google Scottish Government Protection of Women and Girls consultation. It'll come up.
Oh, get involved.
Yeah, please do get involved, get your elbows out, call yourself a quarrelsome dame if you so wish, because it's really, really important, because there are some bits certainly I feel that have been left out, and the two things that we've written to the minister, I think is it Neil Gray? Don't quote me on that, I think it is Neil Gray, but we've written to him to say that we would like the law to be changed, and we would like femicide to officially be put on the books as a type of offence all of its own. Now, a femicide is a murder against a woman where she is being murdered because she is a woman, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, unfortunately.
So the reason for that is we know murder stats, but we don't have femicide stats. And thankfully, relatively speaking, our murder rate is not, well, it's actually enormous. Scotland's murder rate is high overall, but it's still manageable enough because we're a small country to be able to extrapolate out lots of information about it. But I think that having a specific crime of femicide is very important, because it also says what it is. It's not, inverted commas, bunny ears, just a murder. It's a femicide. And I also think that the shelved policies in relation to the crime of misogyny, or adding misogyny as an aggravation to a pre-existing crime, should be put in place. So we're writing to them saying that we think these should be added in to that. It might not happen, but we think it's important to use our voice and to be politically active in Scotland to try and do that.
That's one of the things that we're talking about, and we're talking about being in a clan and about how community together can really make a difference and can move mountains. And this is an area which we can actually have our voices heard.
Yep.
So do what's Claire's saying if you want to. I'm not bossing you around. But have a look for Scottish Government and see if you can find that and leave your thoughts on it. So you reckon it's the end of August, Claire? So we're only on the 10th of August today. By the time you get this, it might be mid-August, but there'll certainly be time to get involved.
Yeah. And you can answer the questions you want to answer and not answer questions you don't want to. So there may be a particular issue that you feel strongly about, but you want to skip the rest, or it's really user-friendly. It's just click through, and if you want to do it fast, it takes you 10 minutes. But after that, you will have a feeling of, well, I've had my say. I want the government to know what my view is on these things.
Really important. If it's shown there's a demand for it, then hopefully it'll change.
Exactly.
Okay, so Claire, now let's move on to who we are remembering in the historic witch trials in Scotland.
Okay, well today, because earlier on we were talking about the heraldic court, the Lord Lion Court, I thought what I would do is look at how old that court was and then see whether or not there were any accusations around that time when the court started. Now, I wasn't able to do that, thankfully, because the Witchcraft Act started 200 years after the Lord Lion Court started. So 1318 was the first mention of the Lord Lion Court.
Isn't that wild? Sorry, that it's been around for so long, the Lord Lion Court, and we're in 2026 now, and we have put something into that court.
Isn't it amazing?
It was 200 years after that started that the witch trials started, and that the witch trials ended a bit more than 200 years ago. That's really wild that it's sort of in the middle of that.
It's crazy.
It's an eye blink of history.
Exactly. And what for historians of an interest in Scottish stuff, it's first mentioned in the name of Robert the Bruce. So it's writings about him mention the Lord Lion Court, and the first date, as I say, is 1318. However, an Act of Parliament officially recognised the Lord Lion Court and formalised his duties to regulate what's called coats armour, and to make sure that they were registered correctly and that people knew who they were and all those sort of things that they still do today. And that was in 1592. It wasn't until 1672 that the register was established by the Lion King of Arms Act 1672. Now, can I point out, it's not the Lion King, it's the Lion King of Arms Act 1672.
Fine.
And it's now in the new Register House in Edinburgh, and the oldest heraldic court in the world.
And so lion is spelled Lyon?
Yes.
Not Lion. So
No.
just for the avoidance of doubt, as far as I'm aware, we've never had Lion lions in Scotland.
I don't think so.
Just wanted to say that, just so we're clear.
I mean, they have very big furry heads, and that would have kept them warm in our extreme weather, but no. So, what I did was that the date of 1592 I looked at to see whether or not there were any accusations around then. Now, the first accusation after that I saw was the Earl of Bothwell. He was accused in 1593. But the Earl of Bothwell is a huge, long story, all of its own. It probably deserves its own podcast episode, to be honest with you. So, and also, I want to amplify the voices of women. So I went on to look at the next person after that on the Survey of Scottish Witchcraft, again, where we've got our information. And the first woman accused and executed as a witch after the Lord Lion Court officially came into existence is a woman called Marion Grief. Her surname is spelled Grief. She was from Ayr, and her trial took place in 1595. Interestingly enough, we know about her not because of parish records noting what had happened in respect of the church, but in respect of the money spent on her trial. So much like Judith Langland Scott did, she followed the money and found out more information about her area in Forfar. This was a following the money moment as well. And what was found in the notes in relation to Marian Grief was, quote, payment for the messenger, twice summoning the assize in Kyle, Carrick and Cunningham, £7, and for burning coals, cordis, tar barrels, and other agraith that burnt Margaret Griff, witch, £4.
So that with the mention of the barrels there, is she one of the instances where they burned her in a barrel?
It looks like it. And for burning for coals, so like lumps of coal, although it's spelt here Coles, cordis, which is cords, and tar barrellis, Barrellis.
Oh, that's so awful. That poor woman.
Yeah. So they had to go and get an assize. They had to go and make sure that they had the authority to prosecute her. And for summoning the assize, for setting up the court in Kyle, Carrick and Cunningham, that cost £7. And it cost £4 in total for gathering together the stuff that poor Margaret Marian Grief was executed with. So today we remember Marian Grief, a woman executed, not a witch.
Terrible. Okay, so our first guest today is Professor Claire Mcglynn, who teaches at Durham University and is just really a fascinating person. But we do need to say, before we start this interview, before you start listening to it, we have to give you a trigger warning. Now, normally, because we're talking about witch trials, we presume that everybody understands that we might be talking about brutalising people, particularly women. But this is very much talking about the impact of porn on society. So we are talking about some very much adult themes. So just to give you that warning, depending on who you're listening with, and you might want to...
There's descriptions, of sex and sexual violence. So if that is not something that will be amenable to your mental health, then...
We shall not hold it against you if you decide you don't want to listen to this. However, it is an incredibly fascinating and disturbing conversation that I think that we really need to understand and get involved with. So that's our first guest. And unusually today, I'm going to tell you who the second guest is now. So if you decide not to listen to Claire Mcglynn, you can sort of fast forward it to the second guest. Is that okay, Claire?
Yes.
Yes. So our second guest today...
You're asking me like I'm in charge of everything, but yes.
In charge of anything. No, I'm just kidding. So our second guest today is actually Dr. Dorka Tamás, who's written a book, I'm just going to get the right name for it, Sylvia Plath and the Supernatural. And so there'll be many people that are listening to this that know who Sylvia Plath was. She was a poet and a novelist and a short story writer. And she had, it turned out, a real fascination with witches. So we got Dorka to come on and talk about that. If you don't know about Sylvia Plath, lucky you, because you've got that ahead of you to find out about. Her book, The Bell Jar, is a really important book in the canon of women's writing. So you might be interested in that. So that's not necessarily particularly upsetting in the way that the first guest is. So without any further ado, please welcome onto the podcast. This is your point to fast forward if you don't want to listen to this. Professor Claire Mcglynn. Hello. We are delighted to have with us today Professor Claire Mcglynn, who is definitely worth following on Instagram. Fantastic content. And to be fair to Claire, we'd been watching her for quite a while, and then thankfully she responded to a message I sent her on Instagram. So that was really nice. So today we're going to have with us Professor Claire Mcglynn. So Claire, welcome to our podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
We're delighted. Now, we tend to start people off with this quite tricky question, potentially tricky. Can you tell us why you're here today, specifically on the podcast, not generally in life?
Well, I'm hoping we're here to talk about some of my recent work. I've just published a book about mainstream pornography called Exposed, and trying to talk about how that's influencing every aspect of our lives. So it's not just pornography, it is how it impacts on gender equality. And I talk about patriarchal porn. So I think it probably connects very well to a lot of the work you've been doing over the years about trying to uncover the kind of patriarchal basis in our society.
So I think that the way that porn is made and consumed has changed so much. I mean, we all had Scottish childhoods. I don't know if you guys had the same experience as me, which was that, you'd
Oh
be
no.
like in the park, and there was always, it's all right, Claire, and there was always little scraps of porn sort of in the bushes, as if men were going out and having a go in the bushes in the woods, and then they'd leave their porn behind. I don't know if that's just the village I lived in. I don't think
No,
it was.
no, that is true. It was like papier-mâché porn because it was always been raining as well.
But it was a paper, obviously, it
Yeah.
was a paper industry. And we grew up, and I don't know if we would count this as porn, Claire, maybe you can give us a lead on this, but with the phenomenon for readers, for listeners and viewers outside of Scotland, outside of the UK, we had a newspaper. I think there were several newspapers that featured a photograph of a young woman with her top off, with her boobs out. And in the Sun it was page 3, but I think there were other newspapers too, maybe in my mind. And that was just a quote unquote normal part of our culture growing up, that you were kind of confronted with a girl with her boobs out, and that was like seen as being normal, and it's so gross. So gross.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was so normal. Although it's interesting to reflect on that now, though, isn't it? Because now you have easily, freely accessible online, far worse than that content. Now, the problem with the page 3 in the newspapers was, of course, because it was in a newspaper. So it was like normal and legitimate and everyday. But that's what mainstream porn is now as well. Millions are viewing it all the time. You know, you're on your phone and they're flicking between the apps. So it's just like it could have been in a newspaper, yet it's so much more worse.
I'm a high school teacher, so I've worked, obviously I guess 25 years, maybe more now, as a high school teacher. And I've definitely seen a change in the way that boys will speak about things like that. Like they're not generally necessarily talking to you directly, but you obviously hear things in the classroom. And I do think that there is a link between sort of the porn that is so readily available and some boys' attitudes towards women. Do you see a link between those two things?
Absolutely, and I think at one level it's like obvious because as I say, millions of people are viewing this sort of material all the time. Young people are all the time. There's some are starting watching mainstream porn and age 10, 11, but certainly by the time you're mid-teens, they're watching it, and about 1 in 5 boys are watching it every day. So it's really regular, and my point is that must be having an impact. It can't not be impacting on general attitudes and how they see women and girls, how they see relationships, because it's a mainstream media that is so popular, just like advertising or the PR industry. Porn is just the same. It's having just the same sort of impact. So absolutely, when that pornography is sexually violent, misogynistic, racist, of course that's then going to be seeping into attitudes, whether it's in the classroom but also in society generally.
Can we talk a bit about what you just said there about it being misogynistic and violent and racist? What do we mean by that?
So I guess as well, just to be clear, I am talking about the mainstream porn sites. So the ones that are easy, freely accessible. And I particularly focus on that because I'm not talking about, there's all sorts of genres, queer porn, gay porn, feminist porn. That's not what we're talking about. But the reality is, on these websites, is when I say it's misogynistic, it's because it's about, well, at one level, it's about male sexual pleasure. The one thing those sites are not about is women's sexual pleasure. It's about men's rights and men's pleasure. It's about men's entitlement. An awful lot of it is exploitative. And that's not even the illegal stuff. That's just kind of the general stuff about men exercising power over women who tend to agree and accept almost anything and everything. But there's also then the kind of much more, I guess I'd call extreme, harmful, soon to be illegal material, that's the incest, that's the strangulation, that's the force. You can't search for rape, but you can search for force. And it's all that sort of content that I talk about when I'm saying it's misogynistic. And then on top of that, the spitting, and then the racist, the racism as well as this kind of undercurrent that goes through it all as well.
I'm not familiar with that corner of the internet particularly. What do you mean by racist then? So like white men against women of color, or
So race is it's a whole category. So on these sites, everyone is categorized in particular ways, and white is the norm. So the only time you see black or minoritized or Asian women, they're labeled as such. They're also labeled as such in very kind of stereotypical ways. The most obvious being black women experience far more aggression in porn, but black men are portrayed as basically hypersexual, violent, aggressive. They're also portrayed in really stereotyped situations. Women are from the ghetto, the men are burglars or rapists. It's and there's all sorts of language there that you would tend not to use. And so it's that kind of, like I say, it's the kind of undercurrent that feeds through. And you get videos like, the only time it's labeled white is when you've got something like white cops F ebony teen. And that's viewed by millions of people. And it's the racism that's pulling the people in there. But you've got some of the titles you can't even really repeat. They're so grim.
Just the thought of like young boys, because it will be primarily boys that are consuming this. I'm presuming. I know that there will be some girls too, but young boys, you're saying there from maybe the age of 10, what they're seeing. So what that is like for a white boy to be watching that, what it's like for a black boy to be seeing his race being portrayed in that way, and then it's just so disgusting. We need to be doing so much more work in school talking about that and not shying away from it and saying, oh, they're too young, because if they're consuming it, even by accident. So I know that I've got kids and my youngest is 18, and we've had conversations, not necessarily about porn, but about things that he's accidentally seen online, like loads and loads of people getting killed. There was a point where there was loads of images, loads of video, people being killed by trains, for example. And that's not a kid searching that out. That's it just appearing. And so it must be the same with porn. They must be seeing loads of stuff they're not necessarily choosing. And then of course you're going to be curious and you might go and look stuff up, but it's so distressing. It's such a horrible thing.
But you've absolutely, sorry, carry on.
No, carry on, Claire, carry on.
I was going to say, you've absolutely pinpointed one of the key issues that I do try and raise in the book, in the sense of this is about what's changed is about the algorithms feeding us particular content. So that's the difference as well from the 20 years ago, where you had to go and search that material out just to even find the porn and to find whatever type of porn. Now it's being fed to us, and the more extreme material is what's fed to us, because that just seems to be, unfortunately, human nature, what we're more interested in or what keeps us engaged. That's why you got this more extreme content. But it's also why when you talk about teenage boys, they're not necessarily searching this stuff out. They don't, a 15-year-old doesn't wake up one morning and think, oh, I know, I'll watch some incest porn with a little bit of force, a bit of strangulation all thrown in. But that's what's shown to them.
And the thing about it is, I know through conversations in schools that girls then think that they have to offer all those things, otherwise boys aren't going to be interested in it. So the rise in anal sex, the rise in strangulation, Claire, we'll probably have to put trigger warnings on this, I'm just realizing, but we that becomes so normalized. And also the question of pubic hair is such an interesting area, like the idea that women and girls should be hairless or just about hairless, and that is so baked into our culture and has been for a long time now. The whole idea about women being waxed, they look a particular way. Why on earth do some men want women to appear hairless? Are you pedophiles? Like it's an indicator that we're grown women. I find it the most bizarre thing. I think that's incredibly bizarre. And then I read a thing the other day that was saying that a lot of porn is quite paedophilic, that it's, that they want the women to look, and I guess that this makes sense, as tracks in a patriarchal manner, but they want women to look pliable and innocent and somebody that can be controlled and taken advantage of.
Yeah, I mean, there is a whole genre that one of the areas that troubles me most on the mainstream sites is the 18-year-old actors. So they're 18, but they look 12 or 13 years old, and they're in like children's pajamas or children's underwear, surrounded on like, you know, with toys around them and that kind of thing. They're designed to look like very, very young girls. And at the moment, that material is lawful, and that is just about as far as I'm concerned, sexualizing very young looking girls. It really is.
Remember during the Page days, they had them dressed up in like schoolgirls outfits with their blouses open and their tie kind of loose, like, so that's not maybe new. I mean, that's sort of borderline, but it's so disgusting.
It may be borderline, but everybody knows exactly what it's alluding to. That anyway, Claire, you're saying it's illegal at the moment, and we know that for the work that you've done, you were given an honorary KC job. Can you tell people what work you've done and how that is going to affect the law in the future?
So in the area of pornography, just over the last few months, there have been some significant changes in the law, and that's come about, when the Online Safety Act, which was supposed to reduce harms online, was being debated. Many people, myself included, said, could we actually think and talk about pornography? Because ironically, even though there was this whole online safety debate, pornography was not even part of it initially. But it became part of the debate, and the government said, OK, we'll have a review, do a review. And Baroness Burton in the House of Lords did a review on pornography, and some of the legislation from that review is now being adopted. One of those areas is when adults are role-playing very young-looking girls. But here, wait till you hear this. I think that's, at the moment, is only applying in England and Wales. It's... yeah,
I was about to ask. Yes.
So why? I know that we have a separate legal system in Scotland for listeners outside the UK. So Scotland is separate to England and Wales. But why are Scotland not doing it?
So the way this is the way that these porn changes have come about it's been a bit last minute, to be honest, because there is also a change in the law relating to strangulation, and we could perhaps talk about that. And that one is going to apply in Scotland. It's just a couple of the other ones that were only agreed at the very last minute of the parliamentary kind of debate are only applying in England and Wales. So,
But we can move fast in Scotland. I mean, once it's there, there's who in Parliament's going to say no, this isn't a good idea. I think we should. Our new ministers have just been appointed. We should just be writing immediately to our new Justice Minister and saying, bring this in. What are you doing about femicide as well? But bring this in.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And AI deepfakes, so sexually explicit deepfakes and the creation offence. I know the Scottish Government is looking at that one as well at the moment. That definitely needs to be introduced as well.
So that's where AI is using real human beings and then creating porn that they themselves have not made, but it looks as if it's them, basically.
It's putting the faces of any people, on bodies that are having sex that aren't those people. That's the fake part.
Absolutely. You can also now, with the technology, you can generate whole new videos that look like someone as well. So, you can type in prompts of X name and the content, and it will generate this kind of whole new video as well. And so in Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom, it's been an offence to share those sorts of images for a while. But just recently, in the last year in England, we made it also a criminal offence to create them in the first place. And that's what Scotland's also looking at now. So you can't even create them, because that itself is a violation and a threat.
Has anybody been prosecuted yet for that?
Not that I'm aware of. That'd
be interesting to see that once prosecutions start, because I think that we've normalized things so much, normalized the idea of dick pics, for example.
I was going to say, Zoe and I were talking about this at breakfast. That sounds wrong. We were having a meeting first thing this morning, and we were just talking. We were looking over your work, Claire, and we want to have a discussion about your book as well, Exposed. and we were looking over it, and we were talking about the phenomena of dick pics, whether or not they be as what was it you described it as, Zoe? Solicited or unsolicited?
It's a really normal part of dating now.
Yeah.
You know, a really normal part of dating.
It's still illegal.
When I was single, I would maybe be messaging somebody. I would say quite early on, please don't send me any pictures. Like in a very, maybe would be read as a very prudish sort of way of just like, A, I'm just not interested in looking at it. And B, I knew from Claire that it's illegal to send them. And I'm a teacher, you know, and you've got to think about, could I get into trouble because somebody else has sent something to me that I've not asked for?
It's not illegal to receive. Yeah,
it's not illegal to receive.
It's not illegal to receive them because you're no part of it. You're no part. They are sending it.
If you had it on your phone,
yeah, it's also not illegal to. Anyway, we're getting into a strange area where I'm telling people. But it is
illegal to send it though, and I think that's something that people don't realise actually.
Well, it's illegal to send them without consent. Yeah,
if you've got consent, that's not illegal.
Yeah.
So if
you can send a dick. Well, if you're an adult, you can send a dick pic to someone who consents to them sending you the dick pic. Yeah.
In Scotland, you can't. So it's section 127 of the Communications Act. I've represented people for it. And there is no defence of consent.
So in England you can, and in Scotland you can't.
I don't know what the situation is in England, but in Scotland, section 127 of the Communications Act, because hilariously, it's prosecuted not as a sexual offence, it's prosecuted as an offence against Her Majesty's communication system. So you're using telephony, and anything that uses telephony that's not appropriate, that's the way it's prosecuted. So there is no defence to it, and I've literally represented people who effectively everyone accepts they didn't mean to send it and they're still guilty of it. That was, you know, those are unusual instances. Obviously, mostly people intend to send it, and I say to them, it's actually illegal. If you're being prosecuted for that offence, there isn't a defence, sadly.
One of the articles we looked at earlier was cyber flashing. So what is cyber flashing, Claire?
Well, that's what we're talking about, really. I mean,
that's what that is.
Yeah, I mean,
when you're asking for it.
Yeah, when you're not asking for it and you're being sent those kind of, well, the law technically in England and Wales refers to genital images, but we're talking about dick pics. Yeah, we're talking about men sending dick pics without consent. And so specifically criminalizing that. I mean, I think attitude it is a kind of, well, I don't know. So you're saying it is standard. I think some attitudes on that have begun to change. There's been quite a number, there's been 4,000 plus prosecutions in England and Wales since the cyber flashing offence was introduced. And I think it's
heartening.
Yeah, I think, well, in my conversations with younger women, I feel like there's a sense of shifted, like they no longer have to put up with it. I'm not saying it's not still common, but, there is I feel like there's a bit of a change. But having said that, with young teenage girls are still all the time having to face this you'll know more as well in the classroom, getting sent these images. Yeah.
I mean, it's just horrible because they've all got phones, you know. You've obviously not got to have your Bluetooth on in school because somebody could send you an image in school, so you've got to think about things like that, which is insane. I mean, I got flashed at in real life when I was a child, which was obviously horrific, but also felt very sort of standard for an 80s childhood. Like lots, I'm not going to say most, maybe lots and lots of women have had an experience where a man's flashed them. Yeah. It's so bizarre.
Yeah, it is. I think most women and most young girls have probably had that experience. And I think the interesting thing that people don't necessarily understand about cyber flashing is that it can sometimes feel even more threatening because sometimes if you're out and about, you don't know who sent you the image. You can be on the public transport, in the coffee queue, etc., and you're getting some, because your eardrop might not be closed down, and someone sends you an image, and then you don't necessarily know who it is or what they're going to do next, basically. So it can feel more threatening.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Claire, I've had a wee look when we're talking. Is it the Online Safety Act that you're referring to?
About
About sending photographs of film or genitals?
that's that's in the Sexual Offences Act now.
Yes.
I think it's section 66.
66A, sorry, yes.
Yeah, this is a test.
I feel like I need to make up some
Oh,
statutes
sorry,
here.
I'm not meaning to test, and I am looking it up as you're speaking, so that's grossly unfair of me.
I don't know how you guys can hold any of that stuff in your heads to refer back to. It's mind-boggling to me.
It's just sadly because we have to refer to it so often. I'm assuming, Claire, you had to repeatedly write about section 66E in your book.
Yeah.
So
that was the new cyber flashing offence that was introduced in England and Wales. But of course, you were able to, well, as you say, you know, the Communications Act, but you were also able to use some of the sexual offences provisions in Scotland. Because you do have the offence about, you know, causing others to engage in sexual activity and view certain material. So some of that was already covered in Scotland as well.
Yeah. What was it that led you to write the book then? So was it just because in your work, in your teaching, because you teach at Durham University, don't you?
Yeah.
And was it something, had you always worked in that area, or?
So I have worked in the area around pornography regulation for many years, and you know, I've seen the changes. What made me want to write the book though was it almost goes back to some of our conversation in the sense that I don't think people realise just how you know, well, harmful and misogynistic and patriarchal some of this mainstream material is. I don't think people realise that. But also, even in the conversations I would then have with people, it would, especially, you know, older people, you know, policymakers, politicians, they would go back to that old argument from the 80s and 90s about, oh, this is just one man sitting in the privacy of his own home. It doesn't have any impact on anything. Can we just leave him alone? And that's not the case now in this, because it is algorithmically driven and viewed by millions. We can't rely on that argument anymore. So I just wanted to jumpstart the kind of debate again and say that's an old debate. This is informing all of people's, you know, sexual expectations, sexual understandings, and that then filters out across society. So that was the motivation really to try and
change the culture. It has
it completely has,
and it's still changing the culture. You know, like if we think about somebody who's a maybe a very extreme example, but like the Giselle Pellico case, where the normalization of, and of course that was criminal and has been dealt with in the courts, but we've seen other cases since then that's still happening, where it's about violence and control against women, and that has to be linked to the proliferation of that type of porn. It has to be linked to it, and that it feeds something in people that maybe wouldn't have become something in that way because it sort of normalized it.
And that I think is important, because what the algorithm has allowed people to do is very quickly go from one person sitting alone in their house doing this to groups of people. And you know, the WhatsApp group in relation to drugging your wife, people were saying people felt free to express hideous criminality that otherwise, had they been sitting in their room, they might think, I can't tell anyone this or I will be vilified. Now they find actually whatever you want on the internet, whatever illegality, degradation, whatever that is, there's going to be somebody else who goes, yeah, that's for me too, and let's talk about it. And that's when people become emboldened in their behaviour.
I absolutely agree. Yeah.
And it's worth saying here, human sexuality is really complex and really complicated. And this isn't about saying, you know, you can't explore these aspects of yourself. It's not about, you know, kink shaming, but it is about saying, you know, like, what is this really what young boys actually desire sexually, or are they performing what they think masculinity is? So masculinity is being forceful and strangling and hair pulling and spitting. The spitting is just like, ugh, I can't get my mind around that. And is it something that then everybody or lots of people are then performing, but actually maybe they're not critically thinking about, well, is this actually bringing me pleasure, or is this something that could potentially be damaging? It's a thorny one.
Well, I think for young people, I don't think this is about any sort of idea of an authentic sexuality. Like I say, I think this is what's presented to them, and certainly in some of the studies of men using child sexual abuse material, many of them talk about how they started off on ordinary porn. They might have watched, the younger looking girls, and they kind of just went on that, a journey, an escalation. And so many who are viewing CSAM, again, are not a classic. They're not a classic kind of paedophile. They've just kind of ended up viewing this stuff because it's taken them there.
When you refer to CSAM, can you explain to the listeners what that is?
Yeah, so child sexual abuse material. So yeah,
I'm glad we're no longer calling it child porn, because that's a term that I've objected to being used before, as if that's something that can exist at the same space as adult porn, when what we're just watching is abuse or the simulation of abuse.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Other than legislation, Claire, what is our way out of this?
Well, without a doubt, education is vital. You've talked about it. But I guess what I would say as well, it's not just education in schools. I do think it's about broader public awareness campaigns, because although we have talked about the impact on young boys, things like the sleep content on mainstream porn sites is being viewed by, men, 18-year-olds, up to all sorts of men. So it's not just about in schools. It is about changing kind of patriarchal attitudes. But on specific things, I think we could have campaigns like strangulation. I think there needs to be a public health campaign around the harms of strangulation and sexual strangulation. This is when individuals are consenting to do that, but they're not consenting in the full knowledge of just how harmful that could be. So I think there's education at all sorts of different levels that's also needed. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing is about consent is that what we should try to move to in relation to sexuality is informed consent. I'm not just and also I'm not just consenting to this act because apparently society sees it as okay, because like you can see it everywhere. So what you're doing, Claire, and the work that you've been doing highlighting this isn't okay, this feeds directly into the harms done to people in society, both the recipients of the behaviour and the causers of the behaviour, is something which is excellent, because somebody may be watching it or reading your book and saying, oh, actually, this isn't acceptable. Is that, are other people doing this? And the same way that the use of porn can escalate to from one thing to another, perhaps the idea of informed consent can become more part of our sexual story. And that's something that I know legislators, certainly in Scotland, were trying to emulate in relation to consent, to try and discuss how consent works between two people and what it means, and when consent may appear to be given but isn't actually given. So I think that
when girls and women
conversation
feel like they have to say yes to something. Sorry, when girls and women feel like they have to say yes to something because that's what normal is. Normal is that range of quite, I don't know, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, we would have seen as being a bit more extreme, is now in the middle, and maybe actually towards what you might have thought of as being vanilla. That's just completely standard, that girls feel that they can actually say, well, no, I actually don't really want to do that.
I really hope some of the book does that, particularly the sections around some of the rough sex material and strangulation, because certainly, I think young women sometimes they consent to things because they're lawfully consenting, but they're uncomfortable and they don't really want to be doing it, and that kind of thing. And it's having a voice that says you don't have to do this anymore. You don't have to. And hopefully some of the feedback so far in the book has some women have been saying that. It gives them the able to just say that I was right. It's not just me.
But I mean, it's patriarchy, isn't it? It's still that system there that that men benefit from it. Not all men, okay. So if anybody takes offence to that, but that men benefit from that system, and that it's about women as being consumable items. and really it really doesn't matter. And in fact, some of it is that there are some men that are getting off on the women not actually being comfortable, and that's part of it. That is part of the enjoyment. God, it's so depressing.
Does any of your work, Claire, or has any of your work touched on the OnlyFans side of the commodification of sexuality?
So that's not been the focus of this book or my work, largely because it is behind a paywall. So it's that much more difficult to find out what's actually on there. And at one level, because it's behind a paywall, and OnlyFans do have some quite rigorous rules about, you know, proving the age of those who are actually on the site, although I know there's been some investigations, they're in a slightly different situation, I think, to some of the standard mainstream porn sites. And X, I mean, X we haven't even talked about. The porn on X, I think, is worse than on many of the mainstream sites. And the access to it is worse.
Do you just mean that you can go on X and follow a site and watch stuff?
Yeah, you can.
Absolutely.
I've accidentally seen things on there. I've come off there now a while ago, but when I was on there, there's things that you can click on. You're like, I did not need to see that. Thanks very much.
It's an incest porn site. It's a rape porn site. It is a porn site. It doesn't even have the content moderation controls that, say, Pornhub has. You know, you can search for a lot of this content, and also on X, because, you know, you have the 160 characters, etc. You get very graphic descriptions of some of this stuff. It's really horrific, and I mean, this will be slightly changing, but it's where boys say they get their first porn for years has been on X, and it is definitely more horrific and vile, I think, than some of the mainstream sites, and it goes under the radar, you know. And everyone's fearful of it.
What have men's reactions been to your book?
That's a very interesting question. Because not many men approach me and tell me.
Yeah. Because I'm wondering if this is a case of women.
It's the same with our book.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if this is a case of women reading it and thinking, yes, I'm not happy with this. And don't get me wrong, I know there are tons of guys that are not like that are decent and everything. But I imagine that there's a real issue with talking about it openly with other men because of the normalization of it. And then, like, well, are you being masculine enough? You know, like.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, there really does need to be a conversation with men and young boys about it, because this stuff is impacting on them in the way that you described. But it's also, I mean, you know, if you want to get, you know, the rates of erectile dysfunction amongst young men are skyrocketing because they're not able to have, many of them. There was one survey of young people. It was like 37% of the men were saying they were having sexual dysfunction because they were viewing so much porn, and real sex was just so divorced from it that they weren't being able to enjoy themselves. So they are also suffering from this. You know, they're not enjoying it.
And are they then upping the ante that it has to get more and more extreme to have, you know, because I've read that, I don't know if that's true, but like, you know, the idea that you have to escalate it.
Well, many men do say that, yeah, and many men are saying they've got a problematic relationship with it because A, they're escalating, but B, they're not then enjoying sexual activity with real women or others, you know, with real people, because of the content and how well, you know, that sort of instant relief, I suppose, rather than you know, a sexual relationship. So. Because it's not good for them either. Yeah.
The majority of women are obviously not going to look like porn stars, although you can see that there has been a change in aesthetics of young women that are definitely looking more and more like that, sort of dolly-like, which is really concerning.
Well,
but like,
yeah. I mean, men, you won't believe this, but, well, I didn't believe it when I heard it. Men are getting Botox on their balls to soften out the wrinkles. So, you know, it is, you know, the impact of porn on men, and it's not in the same numbers of women, of course, but that's also what's happening. I mean, men are getting Botox on their balls.
You put a hat on a pig, it's still a pig. Like, what's the point in trying to beautify bollocks? That's ridiculous. That's utterly ridiculous.
You can tell the only quote for this particular chapter will end up being that.
What's the point of that? I mean, it's so bizarre and unreal and weird and freaky, and
It's called Scroll Talks. Yeah, it's even got a word.
Claire, thank you for introducing that to us.
Yeah,
what happened with just being clean? You know, let's change the subject quickly. I think I'm actually going a bit red. It's because I'm from Fife, and this conversation's maybe a bit much for listeners.
Claire, where are we going from here? What next? We've got legislation, which hopefully, legislation never works immediately, right? In the sense that attitudes take a long time to change. We've got education. The OnlyFans example that you've given us of being behind paywalls and having better safeguards, because people are going to still watch porn. It's trying to make porn safer. Is that the way you see the future of porn developing? Hopefully, like, you know, that it's guarded and it's supervised. Is that the only two things that we have to look for, or is there anything else?
I think we have to, as you say, you're absolutely right. People are always going to want to watch some sort of pornography or you know, sexually explicit materials. That is just what people are going to want to do. That what we need to do is have that material, or reduce the amount of harmful material, so that there is that sort of range that people can access. My approach, though, is different in the sense of, I think we have to regulate and get rid of the really harmful stuff first, before you can open up that environment. So some people say to me, oh, the answer is not, you know, to regulate porn, it's just more, you know, better porn. And I don't think we'll get to the better porn until we regulate the really harmful stuff. But it's not about saying there can never be porn, because no, you know, of course I need to believe that we can have egalitarian, fair, you know, well-paid, not racist pornography.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that, you know, what we said before, it's complicated. Sexuality is complicated. There's always been, you know, from the days of, I don't know, the Egyptians forward, there's always going to be that. It's a big part of being a human. But I think it's about when it changes the culture to make everybody less empowered, then I think that's where the danger is, isn't it?
Claire, this is off topic of your book and it may not be an area, but interesting, Zoe was talking about the cultural element. Are there cultures that don't have the same problems that we're currently having? Has there been any comparative study? Is that your next book? No. I just wondered whether or not, because I know in Japan there's a huge problem, you know, where bizarrely, at least culturally, women appear to be safer physically on the street. So they have overall a lower risk of crime.
Is that true though? Because I read a thing recently saying actually that it's quite dangerous in Japan, that public transport in particular is quite dangerous for women.
Oh, well, so I had understood it could be relatively, I'm talking like relative crime rates. In Japan, the crime rates are lower. It may be that women aren't safer. That would, of course, not surprise me. But I just wondered if all societies are going through the same thing in the same way, or could we learn from anybody else?
I think in terms of the availability of the sexually explicit materials in the porn, all you know, modern societies that have, you know, have Wi-Fi and access and broadband are equally, you know, I mean, so that's not to say that there won't be in some countries, you know, smaller groups of people for whom this sort of, you know, aggressive, abusive material has not yet infiltrated them. That may well be true, but there's not many of them that I'm aware of, to be honest.
It's about access, isn't it?
Yeah, and Zoe was also talking about, you know, not as it was described, kink shaming, but I wonder if you'd had any contact or communication with the BDSM community, because I know from doing cases that actually consent, in terms of not porn, but what's going on between people, is a more focused question sometimes than it is in ordinary everyday interactions. Have you heard anything from them? Or
so I think you're right about so I kind of like the niche, or maybe that might sound pejorative, it's not meant to, but BDSM community, there's abuse in all communities, so there's abuse in those communities as well. But yeah, consent is much more, it's a core facet of some of those activities. And some of the BDSM porn, not the stuff on the mainstream sites, it doesn't feel as bad when I'm watching it, and I think that's because the consent, you always see that, and it's almost stylized. Whereas on the mainstream sites, when you get material that is supposedly BDSM, which it's just violent and abusive, and the men are just exercising a loathing. So I feel like there can be some differences. The thing about, and I do get responses about that to the book, and I do get accused of quotes kink shaming, and some of that I sure, if you're talking about strangulation, call me kink shaming all the time, because I'm not going to back down from saying that strangulation is deeply harmful, particularly to young women. I mean, it's the evidence is saying it's impacting on their brains. It's like repeated concussion. So some of this stuff, when you say it's kink shaming,
is there a lot of porn where women are strangling men?
Not in the mainstream context, because that's not what it's about. But having said that, when you look at surveys of who is strangling, some women are strangling men, because it's just one of those things. But
wouldn't you at this stage in the 20th century, 21st
well,
century?
yeah, but the thing is, of course, if you've got on average, if you're talking about a woman trying to choke, slope, strangle a man, they're just not as strong. And so it's just likely not as harmful. And frankly, as well, it's not the same threat, is it? That's the point. It's not the same threat. Women experience it as a threat.
Yeah.
Sometimes. It's also,
you couldn't push somebody off, I don't think.
It's also for the reasons that you've said. It's the inequality dynamic that already exists, the underlying patriarchal ideas, men in charge, women subservient. And if we didn't live in a society where women were getting strangled to death and murdered at the same statistical level as they are by men, then it might be a different conversation. But it's not. So it's completely tied in with the fact that women are being murdered by men.
100%, yeah.
I'm just realising, as we're having this conversation, do you have to watch loads of porn then?
So I have done, yes.
Talking to me, sorry.
Sorry. No, I'm talking to the expert, not you as just a standard person on the street. Claire McGlynn. Yeah.
Sorry.
Do you presumably have had to watch a fair bit of it then?
So I have done, yeah. So in a couple of ways, I did a study with a colleague, Fiona Vera-Gray, a few years ago. And what we did was, it was a computer system, looked at the landing pages of all the mainstream porn sites. And so, that was a few years ago. And that was when we found as well, so much of the material that they were pushing to us was sexually violent. And then in writing in the book, yes, I do, because I need to, what's on there, and you can see it changing as well. So I have been on, unfortunately.
Yeah. And again, I just want to say again, for listeners and viewers, it's not so much the idea that, I wouldn't want porn to be banned, because I do think that is just something that lots of people enjoy, and I think if it's not harmful, then that's fine. But it's when we're not applying critical thinking to that, as with everything else in society, when we're not actually thinking about, well, do I as the individual want to do that? Or am I falling into the trap of thinking this is just what women do? This is what we are. And then thinking about, whether the woman that's acting in the porn, is she okay? Is she safe? What's her aftercare? What's her physical life going to be like as, working in that industry? That horrifies me, the sort of the potential damage women do to themselves. Because a lot of these things, it's men sticking themselves into things, and it's women being the landing space for that. I can't think of a more polite way of saying that. That can physically damage and does physically damage women. And we already know nowhere near what we should know about women's health, and it's not looked after properly. So you're going to have all these young girls. I read a thing saying about how they were having problems because of anal sex. There was more and more young women that have to go to the doctors because of damage. And they had a baby yet, if they're going to have a baby.
I mean, with anal sex, you're right, it's on the rise. And what I hadn't even realised, again, to my shame, again, is, well, it's not a surprise. I mean, women's bodies are different from men, and our anal passage, whatever you want to call it, is not as strong as men's. So yeah, the repeated anal sex, with, especially if you're talking without proper, lubrication and stuff, can be really damaging to young women. And I think that's another area in which there needs to be far more public education, because on like NHS websites and stuff, it just talks about STIs and stuff. It doesn't talk about what you need to do if you're actually going to do this. And a lot of the mainstream porn around anal sex is about force. It's called penal, and it's deliberately, and there's an awful lot more of it with teenagers. So in the study I did, teen and like ass and anal were closely correlated. So yeah, there's, it's not just quotes anal sex. It is also, a lot of it is rough, forceful, oops, accident, wrong hole, all that kind of thing as well. Yeah.
It's horrible, and then it just sort of plays into the whole idea that sex is already, for a lot of young people, it's really difficult. There is still a shame there about going and speaking to an adult that might be able to give you a different perspective. So there's that kind of sort of closed area where it's just young people that are being taught by extreme porn, mainstream leading towards extreme porn. That's where they're learning from. And they're not then speaking to adults who can say to them, okay, well, if you're going to do that, you need consent, and you need to take care of your body, and you need to look at this and lubrication and blah, blah, blah. They're not having those conversations until then, something bad has happened that's probably causing lots of young women and men trauma that they're then bringing out into the relationships, and then they're having babies. And then, do you know what I mean? It's just a massive, big ball of horror.
We need to catch up with the idea that sex has to be secret. There's, we need to make sex mainstream, not porn mainstream. We need to be able to talk about sex.
I've taught sex education at school. So the work that I do is largely it's mostly boys, and it's boys with additional support needs. So it's a slightly different, area, but you still need to have those conversations. You still need to have those conversations about, most people have sexual desires, regardless of where they are kind of educationally. And we need to be talking about stuff like that. And I'm also an English teacher. So there's definitely been conversations that have come up in mainstream classes where we've talked about things. And I'm not embarrassed to talk about stuff like that with kids. But there is a line where you have to think about, well, I don't want to get into trouble because I've said too much here. But it's something that we really, really need to be the grown-ups on. And we need to develop good, proper materials about that. There's a young guy on Instagram, I forget his name, and I'll try and look up so we can link to it, who's doing some really interesting work where, I mean, as much as we as women can talk about this and so on, they need men that are talking to them. And this young guy goes into schools, I think he's in England, and he's talking to them about what it is to be a boy and what it is to be a man, and about talking about their feelings, and not in a kind of in a soft way. It's in their language, and the boys are boys can like learn stuff. Like, and I think we think, well, that's what boys and men are like. Boys and men aren't like that. They're not predators. They don't have to be. They're being taught that, and that it's being enforced for them by your tates and so on. But they don't have to be like that. I've got two sons, and I do have very full and frank conversations, my younger one in particular. And it's endlessly fascinating to me. They're malleable. They want to be good people, I think, largely,
Yeah, I think you're right. 100%. 100%. Yeah.
We need to talk about it. It needs to be in the light, like you're saying, Claire. It needs to be just normal. Let's talk about this. It's not a weird thing. Let's just,
Yeah. It's if we normalize the idea of talking about sex, the embarrassment goes from it. Yeah. And Giselle Pellico said, "Shame must change sides," and it's absolutely true. Women should just start talking about sex. There's a podcast, two Australian women that are just talking about everything and anything that maybe women would only even talk to about with one another, unless they were very, very close. You'd have to be a bottle of wine in or something before that inhibition left you, so you could talk about X or Y. And they've just started a podcast where they're saying the most embarrassing things, but actually they're becoming so empowered by it. You see them personally going, I can't believe I've said that. I can't believe I've
I've put that out in the world about my own sexuality. And, you know, all I'm saying is maybe it's time for a rise of the matriarchy and women saying, here is what I want, here is what I don't want, and being prouder about their own sexuality in a way, because many people, I am sure, will watch all that porn and think that's what women want or that's what men do.
I think also women, I had a conversation with somebody recently about this, about women's desires. And I think that this actually links to sort of patriarchal sort of structures and actually links back to the witch trials. Because one of the things that we'll sometimes get is, oh, but women accused other women being witches too. And I'm sure that's one of the arguments within porn is, well, women are making a good living from this. You know, women want to do it. Women want to, you know, like say have fake breasts or be hairless or whatever. Women want to be spat on. But I think a lot of the time it's that women are saying, well, I need to match men's energy. If I want the power, I have to do what they're doing. I have to make myself like them, you know, in a sort of a sexual Thatcherite way. I can't believe I've just put those two things together. But it's like a sort of an idea. Sorry, Claire, we'll unpick that later. But it's the idea that you have to be like a man to get into that power space. It's horrifying. We just don't seem to learn from it.
Yeah.
Anyway, Claire,
there's a lot to do.
This was a great for anyone
interested with this. For the benefit of when you get this podcast, we started at 11 in the morning, so it probably wouldn't have been appropriate to crack open the wine at this stage. But I think that the more we have these conversations, particularly parents of teenagers, that we need to be talking to them about what they're consuming, and there are ways of talking to them and just keeping that conversation going about respectful, really talking about who you are as a person, but also the person that you're with and what that looks like. And it's not just about safe sex, like as in condoms. It's so much bigger a conversation. But Claire, thank you for doing this work, because it's really, really important work that you're doing.
And for everyone listening, we will, of course, tag and have links to Claire's book, so you can go and you can find it, and we highly recommend it. I have read a chapter of it, and it's sitting beside 3 books to go, and that's my so I will be coming back probably with questions at a later stage.
Yeah, it's so important, Claire, and it's really hard work, I imagine, as well, because you must get a lot of resistance from some people. And
yeah, I mean, it is. It's one of those. It's one of those topics where, sometimes people can get very defensive, and it's very controversial. So it's almost not as easy as talking about, you know, forms of sexual violence where everyone kind of agrees that it's wrong, you know, and you then debate it. But having said that, there's, you know, it's it's about trying to, well, as you say, it's about trying to have those conversations and open it up. Yeah.
Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you so much. You've started those conversations. We are having those conversations, and we will continue to have them. So we'll continue to watch your work. We're very, very grateful to you, and thank you. We'll continue to promote.
Well, thank you for the discussion. It's been really interesting and really, it's great. Thanks very much indeed.
That's cool. Okay, bye for now. As I mentioned before, we have a second guest today, and that's Dorka Tamás, who's going to be talking about Sylvia Plath, the writer, and her interest in witches. Hi, Dorka. We're so pleased to welcome you to the podcast. Hello.
Hi, nice to see you, and thanks for hosting me.
No, not at all, not at all. We're really pleased to have you on. We spoke to Dorka ages ago. It was probably it might have been 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, because it was in the run-up to us beginning to write the book, and we did an interview, and then I think the sound quality on our side didn't work. So we've been saying for ages, we'll have to come back and we'll have to re-record that and have another chat. Because what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to let Dorka tell us why she's on the podcast, but I think there'll be a lot of listeners that find this interesting, and a lot of listeners maybe don't know about this, but then are going to fall into a rabbit hole of reading the work of this person. So, Dorka, why have we invited you on to the Witches of Scotland podcast?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for having me, guest again. So I have written a book that's called Sylvia Plath and the Supernatural, and it's published by Cambridge University Press. So it's an academic book. but it does have a lot on witches, and it talks about or discusses how the witch trials and the witch imagery has influenced Plath and post-war poetry, from politics to literature to all sorts of magazines and discourses. And I was specifically interested in how Sylvia Plath reimagines the witch figure in her works, which seem to be quite a popular interest for people.
Yeah, because I think if there are listeners and viewers that are listening and watching this that don't really know anything about Sylvia Plath, Sylvia Plath was an American writer who is, I think, perennially sort of loved and really sort of, in some cases, obsessed with some women who, well, many women who love her writing, particularly The Bell Jar, which was her famous novel, but then also her poetry, and certainly her work is still really taught really widely. And a lot of women, I think, really identify with Sylvia Plath probably because of her terrible, untimely suicide, and her tumultuous relationship with the poet Ted Hughes. You meet a lot of women when they're younger that kind of, I think it's often younger women, that'll say, oh, I hate Ted Hughes and I'm team Sylvia Plath, which is not a very academic approach to it. But I think a lot of people really sort of connect with the difficulties that Plath had. So what drew you to being a scholar about Sylvia Plath?
A good question, yeah. And like many young women, I started reading Plath at the age of 19, 18. I found her on Tumblr, actually, which is a microblog website, and just quotes from the Bell Jar and her journals. And I could really identify as well with her writings. And then I got sucked into her poetry. And I think I was always interested in like magic and the topic of like witches as well. I'm a millennial woman who grew up with witch media all around us in the late 90s, 2000s. So I just had a way to combine my two special interests.
Yeah, it makes sense, because I think we were talking about this. Claire and I did an event last night in a bookshop, and one of the people there asked me about how I felt about the way that witches are portrayed in films. And I think it's really interesting, sort of the 20th century portrayal of witches. But it moved in some ways from being, thinking about like a scary portrayal of a witch to being young women that somehow sort of mastered power and were able to use magic to make their everyday lives more kind of bearable in some ways. So although that's not representative of the truth of the historical witches and the witches of the witch trials, it's a really interesting modern phenomenon. And I think Plath, when was Sylvia Plath born?
She was born in 1932, so just when the Great Depression started, and that, World War II and the early Cold War really influenced her writing. And in terms of like the McCarthy witch hunt, and that's something I talk about in my book as well, how she connected with Salem and the political witch hunt of the mid-20th century America.
Should we start with the McCarthyism then? Because that's, I think, the Crucible, the Miller play is important to her, or was important to her, but I think is also really important in our 20th century ideas about witches, because I think the Crucible is the main text that people understand. Yeah, exactly. That's the main thing that's taught, and not everybody is taught it sort of accurately for what the play really is. So maybe we could talk about that a bit. So Dorka, what was her interest and response to the Crucible?
She actually saw the Crucible in the theater when it came out in 1953. She talked about it. She wrote to her mother in her letters that it was a really interesting play on the Salem witch trials. But because she lived in Massachusetts, quite close to as well where Salem is, 30-minute train ride from Boston, and in her education, she encountered texts that also deal with the witch trials, and she researched the topic in her high school education. And so she was quite well versed with the history of the witch trials in the US and specifically Salem. And in one of her high school papers where she compared the witch trials to the 20th century, what she calls race riots, so like racial injustices and the kind of scapegoating of any kind of minorities and anyone who's other than, the status quo describes. Yeah.
I mean, certainly I started reading Sylvia Plath. I read The Bell Jar when I was at secondary school. And it's that sort of, correct me if I've got any of this wrong, because although I've got an English degree, I didn't do any special focus on Sylvia Plath. So this is just a kind of a hobbyist take on her. But the book is semi-autobiographical about
Yes.
a young woman that wins this opportunity to go and work in a magazine in New York. And it tells the story of a young woman that's got mental health issues and has attempted a suicide, and the difficulties that she has with that. And I think a lot of women really like, young women particularly, really like The Bell Jar because her portrayal of Esther is really interesting. But the book opens, in my memory, with her talking about two real life figures being sent to the electric chair.
Yes, it does start with the electrocution of the Rosenberg couple, who, it's also one of the most famous sentences in a 20th century literary book. It was a queer sultry summer, the summer they electrocuted the Rosenbergs, and I didn't know what I was doing in New York. Which really sets the scene in terms of like politics. And she's, as the narrative unfolds, as well, she identifies with the Rosenbergs, and then she creates the parallel between the electric execution of the Rosenbergs in the electric chair and then the electroshock therapy she receives. So there is an idea of the connection between torture and the torture of political victims, but also she links that, I think, to the witch trials, because she was really affected the way in which witches were tortured in the early modern period.
And she had an understanding of the politics and what was happening there. And you mentioned as well about this idea about sort of othering. And I think that she would have understood, obviously I didn't know Sylvia Plath, but I think that she would have understood the aims of the campaign that we have, and the idea that we sort of collectively share, that the witch trials were picking on a vulnerable group, and it was a means of social control, which is, kind of what the Crucible's talking about as well. But did she have an interest in witches previous to the Crucible?
She did, but not, I think, so her earlier works that talk about witches, or the way in which she uses a witch figure, is manifold. So she writes about fairy tales and fairy tale witches. That is a very different type of witch figure. It's more like the wicked witch that she identifies often with evil maternal figures, and it's a way for her to reconcile her relationship to her mother in writing. So that's a different type of literary witch figure. But as I mentioned, she studied, for example, Nathaniel Hawthorne's works in high school that draw on the Salem trials, and we see some of that appearing in her school papers that are kept in archives, but not in terms of like the witch trials themselves. I think she wrote about Salem. She also developed some interest when she met Ted Hughes, and Ted Hughes, interestingly, also lived in a place close to where the trials took place, in Yorkshire, near the Pendle Hill, where the Pendle witches were executed. So they shared as well this connection with living close to these historical sites.
So Ted Hughes was her husband.
Yes.
And at the time that she met him, he was a kind of a rock star of the poetry world, and was seen as an intellectual giant, and wrote a lot about lots of different things, but including nature. And they met, and a lot of people romanticize, sort of take Sylvia Plath's side of things, that he the sort of, you'll tell me whether this is actually borne out by any research, but the sort of the idea about Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath was that he was this older sort of controlling figure, and that he cheated on her and broke her heart, and then she suicided and left their two children behind when she suicided. He then went on to marry somebody else who I think she also suicided.
He didn't marry the next person, Asya Bevel, which was actually a big conflict in their relationship, because she wanted to marry him and Ted Hughes refused to do that, even refused to acknowledge their children legally.
It's not. As you can tell, Zoe knows so much more about this topic than I do at all. I haven't actually managed to read The Bell Jar.
jar?
No, I started it, loved that first bit,
Mhm.
and I kind of then got lost in the weeds of when she went to New York.
Oh, I really like it. I find it's really funny, and people I don't expect it to be funny, and I don't know if that says something about me, but it is really funny. And there's bits in it that, you know, like the girl has sort of some terrible experiences with young men, and she doesn't really know who she is, and she has some experiences with other women as well, which I think a lot of women can kind of chime with that. But this idea about the witch, she comes back to that in her poetry, doesn't she, as well?
Yeah, sorry, just to finish your question.
Sorry, I'm scattergun here.
Yeah,
Sorry.
fine. So I would say that it was rather Plath who made or helped Tatis to be this rock star of a poet, because she was kind of her secretary and like marketing PR person. Without Plath, Tatis wouldn't have been famous at all.
I did not realise that.
Yeah.
Okay, so behind every great man is a woman that's making him
Yes.
look great.
Who's
Yeah,
typing,
yeah.
she was typing, you know, his poems, sending that to American literary magazines as well as British ones, acting as a PR person for him. But yeah, so Tatis, I mean, they had it's sort of hard to talk about because, you know, there are different ways to look at it, and depending on how, you know, how much pro-Tatis, anti-Tatis you are, that will, you know, influence your opinion. I try not to delve too much into the biography because I think it just gets complicated. I'm more interested in the poetry and the literary stuff. But they, you know, that's undeniable that they influenced each other, and it was actually Tatis who prompted a topic for Plath to write about on the witch burnings. So that was a prompt that Tatis gave her, but you know, she already showed interest in the subject. It was just something that they also shared.
So you mean that he gave her a writing prompt as a kind of a writing exercise, an idea that she could write from? So he gave her some kind of get an idea going, and this was the idea she came up with to write about witch burnings. Because I've read some of her work where she describes that. So she went on to write poetry then about the witch trials, or sort of about women being accused and being punished for being witches. Why do you think that she had an interest in that?
In the poem called Witch Burning, which is a part of a sequence called Poem for a Birthday, we see a kind of narrative of rebirth, and the fire is similarly to one of her most famous poem, Lady Lazarus. The fire is both kind of there to torture the witch, but also as her power, and so it's like twofold. But in that sequence and the witch burning poem, she links it back to her experience to the electroshock therapy, and she makes that connection between like the burning witch and, you know, the electroshock therapy as an electro burning of somebody, similarly the way in which the Rosenbergs were electrocuted. And so that was something that she could really identify. Even she wrote in her journals a section. She was describing an argument she had with Tatis, but she was describing this book she was reading on the witches, and she said in her journal that Tatis accused her of throwing this book out because she could never stand the torture part. So we knew that she was highly emotionally affected by this subject, and I think that's the part that she's identifying and linking it to women and, you know, mentally ill people, any kind of gender nonconformists who are punished by society and these institutions.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a lot of you know, listeners and readers that get in touch that are clearly, you know, that express that they're physically affected by when they read about stories about what happened to women, that they really, really strongly identify with them. I think that's something that we talk about sometimes is so alluring. Alluring is maybe not the right word, but really connects people with the story of the witch trials, is that women that have maybe had difficulties themselves in some ways can see what the reality is of when a woman is othered and then suffers a difficult time, and I think can really connect with that. But Claire, I'm surprised you've not read The Bell Jar, because it's pretty kind of goth.
You like goth stuff?
Claire is a total goth.
I know I don't look like it today, shining like white, the whitest thing ever. but in my day I was long, black, crimped hair, full long outfits, etc., listening to the Damned and such like, Sisters of Mercy. But no, it just, I suppose I didn't read into it enough, because it was, I mean, yes, those starting few lines were amazing.
I'm going to close the door a second.
No, go for it. We'll just say to listener. Oh, okay.
Howling Winds, White Gothic. I've just realised how much like Kim Woodburn I look.
16 seconds.
That was the kids in the garden.
Oh, we can't hear anything on our end.
No,
Yeah.
just writing down the time.
I'm just writing down the time for Lola.
To edit.
Not my kids, just landlords.
Some random kids. Right.
Yeah, no. I stand corrected now, Dorka, and yourself, Zoe, and I want to look into Sylvia Plath. As a newbie to Sylvia Plath and the witch story, what would you consider a good way for me to start to get into that?
Actually, I think the witch burning poem is the way that I think many people find her, and that's a quite unique poem as well, because it's very explicit on what it is about. Like, the title is witch burning, and if you Google Plath and witches, that will be probably one of the first results that you get. Interesting, there's a new-ish book called Wayward by Emily Hart. It's a novel. Yeah, and she cites the witch burning poem by Plath. Her protagonist, it's about 3 women, one at the witch trials who is being persecuted for being accused of being a witch, one in the 19th century and one in late 19th, early 20th century, and one in our contemporary time. And they are, they're different generation women, but they belong to the same family, and they are wayward women. The name is as well, Wayward. And one of the women is reading the witch burning poem and thinking about the witch figure and these beetles and flying creatures that are in the poem.
I must. That is one of the first things I do when I get a chance, is have a look at that.
Yeah, because as an English teacher, I would say pick carefully what you start with Sylvia Plath, because her poems are amazing. Some of them are really, really hard, and you need somebody to show you the way into them, I would say, to get the full meaning of them. But the one that Dork is talking about is like a gateway Sylvia Plath poem. And certainly the Bell Jar's not, I wouldn't say the Bell Jar is a hard read. It's quite straightforward. Like, it's a hard read, like, emotionally, because she goes through a lot, the girl. But it is told, Esther, but it is told in like it is funny in place, like kind of dark comedy, and it's a really good snapshot of that period of time. And she paints New York really interestingly. And
I remember being seized by the start of it. I mean, I do remember that.
Yeah.
But I sort of just got lost in the weeds of when she started to make friends and fall out.
And we certainly know that our listeners and readers really like fiction that's in some way sort of linked. And although this on the face of it won't seem like it's witch fiction, I think that if you were to take Esther as a character and take her nature and put her back in those times, she would have been othered, definitely, because she had mental health issues and she sort of spoke out and she was avoidant in some ways, and she would be somebody.
She a quarrelsome dame?
Yes, well, she was a quarrelsome dame. She didn't fit what everybody else wanted her to be, I think. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I named this in my book. I made up this term called Cold War witches, because they are very similar the way in which we interpret or use, or witches have been, thought about of being accused as nonconformist and, weird and different. Even the melancholy or depression was something that women witches were often accused of, or being described as having this melancholic state. And Esther Greenwood has depression in the novel, and she's being quote unquote punished by the institution, by society, for having depression, but that depression is also a result of living in a society where you can't be yourself, where you are forced into these gendered boxes and domesticity and marriage and what.
And she doesn't want that. She wants to be a writer, doesn't she? And she just doesn't perform being a young woman the way that society wants her to perform it. And I think, you know what, here's another argument why people would be interested in it. We see this happening in America just now, and we talk about this a lot, but the rise of Christian nationalism, wanting women and girls to go back to this idealized notion of what women were like in the 1950s, when they left school and they got married and they had babies and they kept beautiful homes, and you know, it was that kind of thing. And that's the sort of romantic idealization that she can't perform because she just doesn't want to. It just doesn't, it wouldn't fulfill her. That's what people like Doug Wilson, the horrific American pastor, wants women now, modern women, to go back to that day and to go back to an overwhelmingly Christian society where there are no gay people, women don't have abortions, and the idea is that you are there to be a lovely wife and a church attender and a wonderful, wholesome mother. And that's what she servant. Exactly, and that's what she kind of pushes back against. So I think on the surface, you know, people that aren't familiar with your work, they might think, oh, what's the, you know, Sylvia Plath, what's that got to do with the witches? But I think it's all this idea of what it is to be a woman and the ways in which we fail, and how at certain times in society we're punished for failing to be the kind of women that men want us to be.
Yes, and I think in many ways, Plath's poems are like even the witch burning poem, and Lady Lazarus, which is a more metaphorical version of that, but I linked the two in my research, really contributed to the second wave feminist adoption of the witch as kind of a rebellious, anti-patriarchy, outcast, fighting for women's liberation, like metaphor.
Which is interesting because, I mean, we do talk about this a lot, that, I mean, the witches of the Scottish witch trials were not proto-feminists, but we have this modern interpretation of them being like that, and I think it gives modern women like an unusual kind of a sort of sense of power, and they're trying to give those women back their agency and say it was because they were like feminists, but I mean, they weren't really, they were just women. But I think that, you know,
that is kind of the same, like sometimes like these poems are quite feminist, but in other ways she's much more talking about the broader politics of the time, identifying, you know, any kind of marginalized person or community. She's thinking about the Spanish Inquisition burning heretics and pagans, and thinking about as well the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki burning the same way.
Yeah, I mean, to be born at the point that she's born, it's not so very long after the First World War. It's during the Depression. It's very close to the beginning of the Second World War, and then she lives through those times. She's sort of formed by that, and then in the times where, you know, obviously sort of the McCarthyism and that side of things, where America was trying to pull back social control again. It's a really interesting time that she lived through, and I think, I mean, she could have feasibly still been alive now, couldn't she?
Yeah, she would be 90, she was 90, she could have been 90 in 2022, so 94.
Yeah.
94 today.
So, I mean, you know, my grandmother's still alive. She's 96. It's funny to think, actually, that my gran was a contemporary of Sylvia Plath. That's odd. I've never thought about that before. But I watched this really annoying book talk thing. It was like a book reviewer who, she was a young woman, and, you know, as we'd say in Scotland, no harm to her. But it was like a kind of a takedown of the bell jar, and she was saying, oh, I can't believe that people still hold the bell jar up as being a great book. It's really badly written, and she's really racist. And why are we never talking about that? And I think the evidence from what I looked with your research is that Sylvia Plath wasn't racist, that she was of her time, but she was really interested in inequalities, wasn't she?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard because sometimes she uses language that now, you know, we deem as racist.
Yeah.
But in other ways, she considered herself quite a liberal. So I think we just have to remember that to consider these things at the time they were written and the time they lived, that doesn't excuse them. But in a way, we wouldn't read anybody if that would be.
Yeah, you have to understanding of the time, but she definitely had an understanding of vulnerable groups and sort of marginalisation and othering and so on. Because what year did the bell jar come out? When did she write it, rather?
Yeah, the bell jar came out in 1963, just a couple of weeks before she died. She first published that under a pseudonym called Victoria Lucas, because it was quite autobiographical and she was a bit scared. I think her like immediate family and people who she talks about in the book to know about it, even though it was published first in the UK and it was only published first in America in 1971. So
Okay.
that was because her mother didn't want the Belger to be published in the US, fearing that how it would play out in terms of like the people who inspired characters, even herself being portrayed.
Yeah, because she's pretty brutal about her own mum, isn't she?
Yeah.
And so what year did she actually write it then?
Just before, so 61, 62, she worked on a manuscript during that time, between like 61, 62, and then, you know, publications take some time.
Yeah. So I mean, like, you know, right at the beginning in many ways of society changing more towards women having more freedom, sort of moving towards the pill and moving towards, you know, women starting to be like in the workplace. And I think that was a really big tumultuous social change time, wasn't it? The 50s were such a contrast to what ended up happening in the 60s. It's so sad that she didn't live longer. I mean, I would have loved to have seen what she would have ended up writing in the rest of her career.
I was going to say, it's so sad. I was thinking, it's so sad that she didn't live to see the second wave feminism, the effect that our book had. But then I thought to myself that then also she would currently be seeing what's going on at the moment and be screaming is happening all over again.
Yeah, but I mean that's
I think
the curse of being a writer, isn't it? Is that you can always see the shitty things that are happening in society. I think that's the job of the artist, isn't it? Is to create the art so that other people can understand people's viewpoint, and it's a representation of like often terrible things that happen, and you can deal with it more, I think, through fiction or through poetry. I think it's interesting that her work has lived on so strongly.
Absolutely. And, you know, when she was writing The Bell Jar, she considered it a potboiler of a novel. And she was writing to her mother how she's having like laughs out loud because of how funny is it. So she definitely considered it as a funny novel. And, you know, it has a quite sarcastic language.
Yeah.
I love the audiobook from Maggie Gyllenhaal is reading it.
That's definitely what she's actually such a perfect person to read it. That kind of sort of droll, kind of deadpan at points, because she's a really character, Esther. I'm going to go back and read it again.
Well,
I think.
Do you know what I was saying, Dorka? I was thinking you've inspired me to pick it back up again and read it. But if the listeners are also wanting to read anything that you have written on it, what should they be looking for?
Right. So of The Bell Jar,
Of Plath.
Of Plath.
Yeah. So I think The Bell Jar is great, although I know a friend of mine described it as it shows that the poet has written it because the language is quite poetic. So I think that's why maybe some people struggle with the language. But I think it's really having a moment and it's a good read. And I think that would be interesting to pay attention if you read that, the dynamics between genders as well. I mean, that's a big part of the book, and how she describes the kind of living in that environment. You know, just try and imagine yourself in that time, and how her descriptions of, you know, she describes how she's dating with this guy called Buddy Willard, who is like a nice guy, a typical American middle-class white dude, who turns out that he had sex with these other women, and she as a woman not allowed to have sex, and they kind of seeing each other, but it's all like a pressure from their mothers, and she doesn't really want anything with him, but he's kind of like very full of himself and thinks he's better than her. And then, you know, the description on the torturous electroshock therapy that she received, that some of those I think quite hard to read as well, and just maybe a trigger warning for those that are affected by this. And I don't know if you heard about it, but The Bell Jar will be adopted into a film soon, which is yeah, it's a little bit controversial because well, the director is called Sarah Polley, who I think she's a very regarded Canadian director. Billie Eilish will play Esther Greenwood.
That's interesting because Billie Eilish is autistic. And I think
that.
Yeah, I think Billie Eilish is, and I think that's a really interesting angle about sort of not fitting into the kind of neurotypical world. That's really interesting. I'll have to look up more about that.
Yeah.
whatever happens, it's always amazing to watch an adaptation. We only have to think about what happened with Wuthering Heights. So no doubt I'm going to start reading before that time. I'm going to be reading the book. I'm going to be reading the poems.
Yeah.
And do you have anything of your own that people can go and look at?
Dorka's got a fantastic book.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Sorry.
to talk about.
So I just also wanted to mention that the new collection of Plath's poems came out this May. It's a very big collection. I can show you. It's like 1,000-page long.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it includes all of her poems that were unseen before. So, from age 5 until her death. And it has very great annotations and, notes on the different variations. So it's a resource if you are interested in her writing and her poems. My own work. So I have a book called Sylvia Plath and the Supernatural. It's an academic book and unfortunately quite pricey, but you can order it for your university library or library usually that they're quite happy to get books for you. They tend to get normally the online version, the digital one, but ask for the physical copy.
Yeah.
Even though I get more royalties from the ebook, but I want like the book to be in the
with your book, but also the collection of poems by Sylvia Plath.
Yes.
People, I'm sure that's expensive, that book, but remember your library. So if you're not already a member of your library, join your library, and then you just say to the librarians, could you order in these books, please? And then they will do their best to get them in for you. Remember that the library is there. I know I bang on about this, but use your libraries so they don't get lost. They're shut down.
Yeah.
But Dorka, it's been so nice to talk to you. And also Dorka gives talks as well that are online.
Yeah, some of them are online that you can also buy the recording. It's an on-demand recording. So I have a link for you that you can put in the description. But I do talks with this company called Seed Talks that are doing these kind of talks across the UK. So I hope to be on tour more in the autumn coming up. Doing talks on Plath, witches, poetry, sometimes Taylor Swift as well. So
yes.
If you come and if you get the link from Witches of Scotland, you can say hi to me. I'm happy to talk to everybody.
That's cool.
Brilliant.
It just shows how broadly across the culture the idea of the witch and women's idea of who they are and identity, how broadly it reaches. So Dorka, thanks so much for coming today, and we look forward to maybe hearing some of your talks and reading more of your work and delving more into Plath's back catalogue.
Yeah, you've inspired me. Thanks so much, Dorka.
Thank you so much.
So that was a really interesting episode, Claire, like a real range of things that happened in there. And a lot to think about. It's not easy being a woman. I don't think it's ever been easy being a woman, as we know from Sylvia Plath's story, as we know from the days of the witch trials, as we know what it is now.
You want me to start singing Sometimes It's Hard to Be a Woman, because I will do that.
Let's do it together.
Okay.
Sometimes
it's hard to be a woman.
That was quite laggy. That was like you and I are in 2 different time zones. We're going to need to...
It was also, I realised after I got first line, the giving all your love to just one man, and I thought,
not really appropriate, unless that man is our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ.
No, I don't
No.
believe in him.
No, do you know what?
No.
Okay, that's another conversation for another day. It was really interesting though, and absolutely, it's so disturbing what Claire's talking about. It's just really upsetting. But I think again, this is another area in which as a community, we can actually make an impact on things, and it's putting pressure on legal bodies to change laws, to think about the way that as technology moves on, foreseeing the ways in which women are very poorly treated and nipping that in the bud. And also education. I know I've already said this, but why are we not talking about this properly in school? It's no good just talking about like a very little overview of here's the kind of the biology of having a baby. We need to be talking so much more broadly about human relationships, whatever that might look like, and about respect and consent, and about, what pleasure looks like, and about people's agency and about power and how we all kind of work together as society. I just think we're really missing a trick not talking properly about that in school.
Absolutely agreed. And not only that, I think it has come to a stage, I've said this before, I've advocated for it before. I think in legal proceedings, women who are complainers in cases should have their own solicitors.
Can you just say what a complainer is? Because people might not
So
realise.
a complainer is someone who makes a complaint. So if they make a complaint in relation to the fact that they have been assaulted, sexually assaulted, raped, then they are what we call in Scotland the complainer.
So they should have a lawyer representing them as well as the person who gets a state lawyer representing them as the accused.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's come to that stage that we've gone round the houses about why are conviction rates for things so low. And I think one of the things that we should be doing is getting women their own legal representation.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So that was all very heavy. And
Yes.
let us just remember at this point that there is much to be enjoying in life, that it's a really beautiful thing, that we all know each other, and that we just need to keep the fires burning and the hope burning and just keep pushing forward, because the only way out is through. And that's what we have to do.
Well, that was beautiful, Zoe.
Did you like that? Did you like that? That's good, isn't it?
I did.
just think you couldn't just keep getting up every day if you just let it get to you too much. And I think it's important to take breaks, but I think it's also important to keep sticking up for other people that are vulnerable, and together we're stronger. So that's what we just need to keep doing. So join our clan. That's a really good way of community. If you haven't already joined, and you probably already have, but if you haven't already joined, go to witchesofscotland.com. You don't need to buy anything. Like, that's where our shop is. That's where you can buy the merchandise and the tartan and all that. But you don't need to buy anything to be in the clan.
Absolutely.
So go there, sign up for keeping up to date with what we're doing, and then you will be on the list. I think we've got quite a lot of people already signed up for the clan.
Yeah, absolutely. But as you say, it's so important that we remember you don't have to do anything other than be part of the community. People have been saying, is it cultural appropriation if I'm not Scottish? No. People have asked whether or not you wearing the tartan is okay if you're not Scottish. Absolutely.
Yes.
Clan is community. Clan, kith and kin. It is about creating a group of people who feel the same way about something. And interestingly, one of the famous flexibilities about Scotland was that you could be in one clan, but you could agree with someone in another clan about something else. So, like Venn diagrams, you could be in one clan for something and you could be in another clan for something else. And fact fans, yesterday I found out that some people would wear one colour of tartan on their top half and another colour of tartan on their bottom half to represent both their clans.
Well, yeah, that's cool. It makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah,
you know,
just to show their allegiance to whatever it was. But yeah, it's not like, because people have also said, do you have to pass some test or no? There's no blood oath. I mean, who would want that?
There are some gobshites on the internet now that are giving all this baloney about what it is to be Scottish and about your bloodline and about how you have to prove this and if you're a Pict and all that kind of shite. In Scotland, we have very much got a policy, all the decent people in Scotland have got a policy about new Scots, which is that if you choose to come and live here, you're Scottish, right? So we don't really, sensible people don't look at bloodlines or ethnicity or religion or any of that. It's just that, do you want to be part of this great country and you're going to work in a good way here, then yes, you are Scottish. And the clan is basically the same. You don't need to be Scottish. You don't need to live here. You don't need to have a clan already. If you're in a clan already, you can also be in Clan Witch of Scotland. It doesn't cost anything. You don't have to prove to us. Please don't email us your family backgrounds. I mean, it's interesting, but we don't have time to read it all. You just need to be interested. That's it. Just be interested. Is that everything we needed to cover?
I think that's everything we discovered, except there's one last very important thing.
What's that then?
Are pets allowed in the clan? And if so, raccoons and ravens, what's the status?
Yes, they are, obviously. Okay. As long as you clean up after them and you don't let them up on the countertops. Okay, I'm quite serious about that. I don't like animals in food preparation areas. So
Okay. What about raccoons on the sofa?
I don't know if you should let raccoons in. Somebody got in touch this week from Canada and described raccoons as being vicious.
I mean, I'd be vicious as well if I was that cute and not running the world.
Exactly, with their lovely little hands.
Exactly. They probably think, why am I out here in a dumpster? I should be ruling the world.
My fingers should be bedecked in diamonds.
Exactly.
I think a raccoon would think along those lines. Well, they sucked peanut butter for under their nails.
Are you getting me mixed up with a raccoon there, Zoe?
Yes, I am. I am getting you mixed up with a raccoon. But seriously, keep them away from food preparation areas.
Okay.
That's not something I'm going to be flexible on. I'm quite serious about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we better, we have to write a constitution, and I will certainly include that in said.
Also, I just want to make clear, we do not have a plan to have an enormous Clan Witches of Scotland house where everybody comes to live. I mean, it's going to be a big kitchen.
Okay.
Or maybe we will, Claire. Maybe we will. Do you know what would be cool? It'd be cool if we had like one of those tiny home retirement villages. Where...
Oh my God, I'm in. Where are we buying it? Like Scotland? Okay.
It would have to be in Scotland, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a given. But we could get eco homes and have like saunas and a bit like Swami and like sort of like Scandinavian and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then at night we could have a book club where we would all get together in a church hall.
Oh, no,
and there'd be a crackling fire.
No,
and
I'm not doing that.
What?
No.
Listen, you can stay at home and make sure
I'm in the borderline misanthropic era. I'm happy to be in it, but also I'm going to need some time on my own.
You can have some. What do you mean some time? You never get any time from me. Constant dawn to dusk annoying you.
Exactly my point. Anyway, we're unraveling. You know what I'm going to do now, Claire? I'm going to go, this is a flex, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to go for a run and I'm going to run off some of this pure rage that I'm feeling about various things.
Final. That's fantastic. I'm so glad. Everybody is loving your Rage Revolution posts. Can you please do some more?
Well, yeah, I mean,
The trouble is she hates being videoed, so she's in the middle of a rant and every time I put up the phone to catch her in action, she stops ranting.
Yeah, because I know what you're doing. I'm wise too. Right, okay. Thank you for joining us. Take very good care of yourselves and stay
quarrelsome.
Thank you. Goodbye.
If you'd like to learn more about the Witches of Scotland, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for our mailing list at www.witchesofscotland.com to keep updated with the campaign. On that site, you'll be able to find how to link with us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.